She had always dreamed of living somewhere quiet, somewhere the noise of the city couldn't reach her. After years of saving and searching, she finally found the perfect spot. A small lake tucked behind a few hills, surrounded by tall trees, and the kind of silence that felt almost sacred. The water was clear, reflecting the sky like a mirror, and the gentle rustle of leaves made her feel at peace in a way she hadn't felt for years. She spent her first day there walking along the shoreline, feeling the soft sand under her shoes and taking deep breaths of the clean, cool air. It felt like freedom. The house she bought was simple, just enough for her needs, with a small porch facing the lake. From that porch, she could watch the sunrise in the morning and the fireflies dance across the water at night. She often sat there with a cup of coffee, just letting the world drift by while she listened to the gentle hum of nature. Her neighbors were few, scattered along the winding road that led to the lake, but that suited her just fine. She wasn't looking for company. She wanted her own little corner of the world, and for a while it felt perfect. In the first week, she took her kayak out on the water, gliding quietly across the lake as the early morning mist curled around her. She watched the fish jump occasionally and the birds swoop down to catch them. It was magical in a way she hadn't expected. Each paddle stroke felt like she was claiming a tiny piece of happiness for herself, and she laughed softly at the sheer joy of it. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged somewhere. But even in paradise, small disturbances can appear where least expected. On the third day of her stay, as she was pruning a few overgrown shrubs near the lake, she noticed a woman walking along the far edge of the property. She didn't think much of it at first, maybe a neighbor out for a morning walk. But the woman's face was tight with suspicion, her gaze sharp and unwavering. She stopped at the edge of the trees, clearly staring straight at her. "Hello?" she called, waving politely, expecting at least a wave back. But the woman only stiffened and didn't respond. Something in that silence felt heavy, almost threatening, even though nothing had been said yet. She returned to her shrubs, trying to brush it off, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Over the next few days, the woman appeared again. Sometimes from across the lake, sometimes walking along the property line. Each time she seemed to study her closely, like she was measuring her presence and deciding if it was acceptable. It was unnerving, but the property owner tried to ignore it. After all, she had done everything by the book. The land was hers, bought legally with papers and surveys to prove it. There was no reason for anyone to act as though she was intruding. One afternoon, as she unpacked a few boxes in the living room, the doorbell rang. She opened it to see the woman standing there, arms crossed, a frown etched deep across her face. "You can't be here," the woman said sharply. "This is not your property." For a moment, she thought it might be a joke. "Excuse me?" she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "I think you're mistaken. I bought this place legally. It's all mine." The woman's eyes narrowed. "You're standing on what belongs to everyone. You can't just come here and act like it's yours." She took a deep breath, feeling the first spike of anger. "The land survey shows clearly. This house, the yard, the shoreline, the lake, it's all part of my property. I have the documents right here." She held up a folder containing the purchase papers, the legal survey, everything that proved she had every right to be there. The woman didn't move. She just stared as if the papers were invisible. There was a stubbornness in her gaze that chilled the owner more than any anger could. "I don't care what papers you have. You're intruding," the woman said. Her tone left no room for argument. The confrontation ended when the woman turned sharply and walked back down the path toward her own house. But the sense of unease stayed with the property owner. She realized that owning land wasn't just about documents and surveys. Some people treated boundaries differently, not as lines on paper, but as lines in their minds, lines that they expected everyone to obey. That evening, she sat on her porch, staring at the water as the sun dipped behind the hills. She tried to let the tension fade, but she couldn't shake the image of the woman's face, so filled with fury and disbelief. She felt a little foolish, wondering if she had imagined the whole thing. Yet the feeling of being watched had grown stronger, heavier. The next morning, determined to reclaim her peace, she decided to spend time on the lake. She pushed the kayak into the water and started paddling gently, listening to the familiar sounds of nature. The mist clung to the surface, and for a while she almost forgot about the confrontation. She closed her eyes, letting the morning calm fill her. That's when she heard the shout. It came from the edge of her property, sharp and urgent, carrying over the quiet lake like a warning. You're not supposed to be here! Startled, she turned to see the woman standing at the tree line, hands on her hips, screaming across the water. She tried to respond, calling out that she owned the property, that the lake was hers, but the words were lost in the distance. All she could do was paddle back slowly, her heart pounding, trying to stay calm. When she reached the shore, she noticed something she hadn't before, a small group of neighbors drawn out by the shouting. Some looked confused, some cautious, but no one stepped in. The woman continued yelling, and though her words made little sense to anyone else, the anger in her voice was clear. The owner felt a mixture of fear and frustration. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, yet here was someone trying to claim her property as if she had no right to be there. After the woman finally stormed off, she sat on the porch again, shaking slightly. The peaceful morning she had imagined suddenly felt fragile, as if at any moment someone could come and tear them away. But as she looked at the lake, its surface calm and still, she reminded herself why she had come here in the first place. This was her land, her sanctuary. She had every right to be here. That night she stayed up later than usual, going over every document, every map, every detail of the purchase. She needed to be sure, not just for herself, but for anyone who might try to challenge her. She realized that owning property wasn't just about buying a house, it was about protecting it, standing firm when someone tried to take it away, even if it seemed unbelievable. By the next morning, she felt a little braver. The sun rose over the lake, turning the water golden, and she felt a surge of determination. She would not be intimidated. She would enjoy her lake, her trees, her home, just as she had dreamed. No one else could change that. And yet, as she opened the door and stepped outside, she noticed movement across the property line again. The woman was there, staring, waiting, watching. The confrontation hadn't ended. In fact, it was only beginning. The morning started like any other. The sun had just begun to peek over the hills, casting a golden light across the water. She stepped outside with a cup of coffee in hand, hoping the fresh air would calm the lingering tension from yesterday. The lake stretched before her, smooth and inviting, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe deeply, letting the warmth of the sun seep into her skin. It felt like a fragile peace, one she feared could be shattered at any moment. It didn't take long. A sharp, angry voice cut through the quiet, making her heart jump. "You can't be here." She froze, squinting toward the edge of the property. There she was again, Karen, standing just beyond the trees, arms crossed, her expression filled with fury. The woman had a way of looking at her that made the air feel heavy, as if every word she shouted carried the weight of judgment. "I already told you," she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. "This is my property. I have the papers." Karen's frown deepened. "I don't care what papers you have. You're trespassing. I'm calling the police." Her stomach sank. She had hoped it wouldn't come to that. She had done everything correctly, legally, but the thought of someone accusing her of trespassing, on land she had paid for, on her own lakefront, felt like a nightmare. Within minutes, she heard the distant sound of a siren, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel as a police car pulled up along the narrow road. She watched as two officers stepped out, looking calm but alert. They approached the edge of the property where she stood, trying to remain non-threatening while assessing the situation. One of the officers nodded politely. "Good morning. We received a call about a possible trespasser. Can you tell us what's going on?" She exhaled slowly, gripping her coffee cup tightly. "This is my property," she said firmly. "I bought this house and the land legally. The lake, the yard, everything here belongs to me. I think the neighbor who called you doesn't understand that." She handed over the folder with all the documents, the purchase agreement, the property survey, the title deed. The officers exchanged glances, then took the papers to examine them. Karen, standing off to the side, crossed her arms and huffed, clearly frustrated that the officers weren't immediately siding with her. She muttered under her breath, loud enough for them to hear, "This isn't right. She shouldn't be here." The officers returned to the property owner, looking slightly reassured. "Well, everything seems in order here," one said. "Legally, this is your property. You have all the documentation." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "No, I've lived here for years. I know these woods, these trees, and the lake. You can't just claim it." The officer raised a hand gently. "Ma'am, we're only here to make sure everyone's rights are respected. According to these documents, this land belongs to her. Karen's face twisted with anger. This is ridiculous. I'm going to get a lawyer. This isn't over. She spun around and marched back down the path toward her house, muttering threats under her breath. The officers turned back to her. Are you okay? One asked. Do you want us to stay for a while just in case? She shook her head, trying to steady her nerves. No, thank you. I think she'll calm down for now, but I can't believe this is happening. It's my property and I'm the one being harassed. The officers nodded. Just keep your documents handy, and if anything else happens, call us immediately. With that, they got back into their car and drove off, leaving her standing by the lake, feeling a mix of relief and lingering unease. For the rest of the day, she tried to focus on normal things. She cleaned the porch, organized the kitchen, and even took the kayak out for a short paddle. The water was calm, the birds sang, and for a few hours it felt like the world had returned to its natural rhythm. But every now and then she would catch movement across the property line, a shadow between the trees, a figure watching from a distance. Karen hadn't gone away. Later that evening, she decided to take a walk around the boundary of her land, just to remind herself where her property ended. As she walked along the path, her footsteps crunching softly on the gravel, she noticed the subtle signs that someone had been there recently. Footprints in the soft soil, a branch bent unnaturally. Her heart raced. Even though the law was on her side, the knowledge that someone was actively watching and trying to intimidate her made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. When she returned to the porch, she sat down and pulled out the survey map again, tracing the lines with her finger. She had always known boundaries were important, but this experience made her understand it in a way she never had before. A line on paper could mean everything when someone tried to claim it didn't exist. The following morning, she woke to the sound of Karen yelling again. This time it wasn't from the edge of the trees. It was closer, just across what she knew was her property line. Karen's voice was sharp, commanding, and full of accusation. Get off my land! She took a deep breath and stepped outside, trying to stay calm. Karen, please, this is my property. The lake, the house, everything here belongs to me. Look at the documents. Karen waved her off. I don't care. You're intruding. I'm telling everyone. For a moment, the property owner felt panic rising. She wanted to shout back, to argue, but she knew it wouldn't help. Instead, she calmly gathered her papers and took a few steps toward Karen, keeping her voice steady. I am not intruding. This is my land. If anyone doubts it, they can check the county records. I have done everything legally, and nothing you say changes that. Karen didn't respond but continued to glare, her face red with anger. After a tense minute, she spun on her heel and stormed back toward her own house, muttering threats about lawyers and lawsuits. The property owner watched her go, feeling a mix of exhaustion and determination. This battle wasn't over, she realized, but she would not be intimidated. That night, as she sat on her porch with the stars reflecting in the lake, she thought about how strange it was to fight for something that was already hers. The idea that someone could scream and threaten and try to claim her land as their own felt surreal, almost like a story she had read in the newspaper. But this was real, and she had to face it head on. She made a plan. First, she would continue to document everything, every interaction, every visit, every strange movement near the property. Second, she would contact a lawyer to make sure she fully understood her rights and could respond quickly if Karen tried anything more aggressive. Third, she would stay calm and not let fear dictate her actions. Over the next few days, she followed the plan carefully. She kept her documents organized, posted a discreet sign marking the property boundaries, and even spoke to a few neighbors to make sure they understood the situation. Most were sympathetic, nodding as she explained that the land was hers, and a few even offered to help if things escalated. Karen, meanwhile, continued to appear from time to time, always at the edges of the property, always glaring and muttering. The tension never fully disappeared, but the property owner found that preparation gave her strength. She knew the land was hers, and that knowledge was more powerful than fear. One afternoon, she decided to take the kayak out again. As she paddled across the water, she felt the familiar peace returning, slowly but surely. The lake was hers, the trees were hers, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to feel the joy she had imagined when she bought this place. She knew challenges were ahead, but she also knew she could handle them. By the time she returned to shore, she had made up her mind. She would enjoy this property, protect it, and not let anyone intimidate her. The battle with Karen was only beginning, but she was ready, and as she stepped onto the sand and looked back at the lake, she whispered to herself, "This is mine. No one can take that away." The tension didn't ease, no matter how many times she reminded herself that the land was hers. Each morning she stepped outside with a sense of caution, expecting Karen to appear at any moment. Some days she didn't, but the uncertainty was always there, like a cloud hanging just above the lake. It was exhausting, and yet she refused to let fear control her life. This was her home, her sanctuary, and she had every right to enjoy it. One afternoon, determined to settle the matter once and for all, she decided to meet with a lawyer who specialized in property disputes. She gathered all the papers she had: the purchase agreement, the legal survey, the property deed, and even a few letters from the real estate agent confirming the details of the sale. She wanted to make sure she was prepared for any challenge Karen might throw her way. At the lawyer's office, she spread everything out on the desk and explained the situation. The lawyer listened carefully, nodding as she recounted the confrontations, the yelling, the threats. "You have every right to be on your property," the lawyer said firmly. "These documents are clear. The survey shows the boundaries, and the deed proves ownership. Anyone claiming otherwise is legally mistaken." "But she's so persistent," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. "She won't accept it. She keeps saying the lake belongs to everyone, like I'm the intruder." The lawyer smiled gently. "That's common in disputes like this. Some people feel entitled to land, even when it's clearly owned by someone else. The important thing is that you have proof. Keep everything documented, interactions, visits, anything unusual. If she tries to escalate, we can respond quickly and firmly." Leaving the office, she felt a small weight lift from her shoulders. The legal advice didn't change the fact that Karen could still make life difficult, but it gave her confidence. She wasn't alone in this fight. There were rules, laws, and people who could help enforce them. Back at the property, she immediately began implementing the lawyer's suggestions. She marked the boundaries more clearly, placing small, discreet signs near the edges of the land. She started keeping a notebook, recording every encounter with Karen: the date, the time, what was said, and what happened. Even though it seemed tedious, she knew that someday this information could be vital. That evening, she was out on the porch when she noticed Karen watching from the edge of the trees again. This time, however, she didn't feel the same fear. Instead, she calmly waved her hand and said, "This is my property, Karen. Please respect the boundaries." Karen's face twisted with anger, but she didn't approach. She muttered something under her breath, stormed a few steps down the path, and then disappeared behind her own property line. It was a small victory, but it mattered. The property owner realized that asserting her rights didn't always have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes quiet confidence was just as powerful. A few days later, she decided to invite a neighbor over for tea. This neighbor lived a little further down the road and had a reputation for being fair-minded. She wanted to explain the situation from her side, hoping to gain at least one ally in the neighborhood. Sitting on the porch with the tea steaming between them, she carefully explained everything: the purchase, the legal documents, and Karen's repeated accusations. The neighbor listened attentively, nodding. "I can see that you're in the right," the neighbor said finally. "It's unfortunate that she refuses to accept it, but you have the law on your side. Don't let her intimidate you." It was comforting to hear someone else confirm what she already knew. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small sense of relief, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, the neighborhood could recognize the truth. But Karen didn't let up. A few mornings later, the shouting started again. "You don't belong here!" Karen screamed from across the property line, her voice carrying across the lake. This time the property owner remained calm. She had her lawyer's advice, her documents, and the support of at least one neighbor. She decided to record the encounter on her phone, making sure there was a clear record of Karen's behavior. Karen's anger seemed to intensify when she noticed the phone. "You think you can prove anything?" "No one believes you," she shouted. The property owner ignored the taunts and finished recording before turning back to the house. She realized that these recordings could be useful, not just for legal purposes, but also to remind herself that she wasn't imagining things. She wasn't overreacting. This was real, and she had every right to protect herself and her property. Over the next few weeks, she continued to live her life carefully. She took walks along the shoreline, kayaked in the morning, and even planted a few flowers near the porch. Each small act of normalcy felt like a victory against the constant tension. She also maintained her records diligently, noting every movement, every encounter, and every threat from Karen. One afternoon, she decided to host a small picnic by the lake. She invited a few neighbors who had been supportive, hoping to build a sense of community and show that her presence wasn't a threat. As they sat by the water, laughing and sharing stories, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe Karen wasn't the only voice in the neighborhood. Maybe others could see the truth too. But even during these moments of peace, Karen's shadow loomed. Sometimes she would appear at the edge of the trees, glaring silently. Sometimes she would make pointed comments as she passed by on the road. The property owner had learned not to react emotionally. Each time she reminded herself, the law was on her side, the documents were clear, and she had the support she needed. One day, while reviewing her legal files, she realized something important. Owning property wasn't just about buying land. It was about protecting it, understanding her rights, and being prepared for challenges. She thought about how strange it was that someone could scream and accuse her of wrongdoing when she had done nothing but follow the rules. It was frustrating, exhausting, and sometimes heartbreaking, but it was also empowering. She was learning to stand firm, to assert her rights, and to trust herself in the face of unfairness. Later that week, she received a phone call from her lawyer. The lawyer reminded her to continue documenting everything and mentioned that if Karen decided to escalate further, they could file a formal notice to protect her rights. It was a reminder that preparation was just as important as confidence. The property owner felt grateful. She wasn't alone in this battle. As the days went by, she noticed a subtle change. Karen seemed slightly less aggressive, though still hostile. Perhaps the consistent documentation, the presence of supportive neighbors, and the legal advice were beginning to have an effect. While the tension hadn't disappeared, it had shifted. The property owner realized that sometimes patience and persistence were more effective than confrontation. One evening, as she sat by the lake, she reflected on everything that had happened. The shouting, the threats, the fear, it had all been part of a larger lesson. She had learned that owning land came with responsibilities and challenges she hadn't anticipated. She had learned to stay calm, to document carefully, and to seek support when needed. And she had learned that even when someone refused to see the truth, it didn't change reality. The sun set behind the hills, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. She watched the reflection on the water, feeling a quiet sense of pride. She had stood her ground, protected her property, and refused to be intimidated. The lake was hers, the house was hers, and for the first time in weeks she allowed herself to feel truly at peace. Even though Karen's anger still lingered, she knew she was prepared. She had the law, the documents, and the support of neighbors. More than that, she had her own determination. She had learned to trust herself, to trust her rights, and to trust that she could handle whatever challenges came next. And as the night settled over the lake, the water reflecting the moonlight, she whispered softly to herself, "I will not be afraid. This is my home. No one can take that away." The days grew longer and the evenings cooler, but the tension around the property never seemed to fade. She tried to keep her routine: morning coffee on the porch, walks along the lake, small chores in the yard, but every sound from the edge of the trees made her heart skip a beat. Karen had become a constant presence even when she wasn't visible. There were whispers in the neighborhood, subtle glances from passers-by, and the occasional lingering figure who seemed to watch her from a distance. It started with small things: a tire mark on the dirt path near the property line, footprints in the sand where no one should have been. Once she found a branch snapped near the edge of the lake, almost as if someone had deliberately tried to mark their intrusion. Each discovery brought a mixture of anger and fear. She knew she was legally safe, but Karen's persistence was exhausting. She couldn't understand why someone would continue to harass her when the truth was clear. One afternoon, she decided to take action. She called her lawyer again, explaining the recent incidents and asking for advice. The lawyer recommended filing a formal notice to document the harassment and assert her rights more clearly. It was not an act of aggression. It was a step to protect herself in case things escalated further. She agreed immediately. Filing the notice felt strange at first, as if she were entering a war she hadn't asked for, but she knew it was necessary. The next morning, She noticed Karen watching from a distance again. Karen's glare was sharp, almost as if she could burn holes through the trees. The property owner held her ground, standing tall and calm. She wasn't going to react to anger with anger. She was prepared this time. With a quiet resolve, she went about her day, tending to the yard, cleaning the porch, and even planting a few flowers near the edge of the property. Each action was a small statement. She belonged here, and she wasn't leaving. Despite her calm, rumors began spreading through the neighborhood. Some neighbors whispered that she was trying to take over the lake or that she didn't belong. It was frustrating. People who had no involvement in the situation were forming opinions based on Karen's loud accusations. She realized that part of the battle wasn't just legal, it was about perception. She had to make sure the truth was visible and understood. Not just to authorities, but to the community around her. To address this, she invited a few of the neighbors she trusted to see the property firsthand. She walked them along the boundaries, showed them the survey maps, and explained the legal documents in simple terms. They nodded, impressed by the clarity of her ownership, and promised to support her if Karen tried to escalate further. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough to give her courage. She realized that having a small network of support made the tension more bearable. One morning, as she was walking along the lake, she noticed Karen approaching with a determined stride. Her anger was obvious, her voice sharp as she yelled, "You don't belong here! You're trying to take the lake from everyone." The property owner stopped and turned to face her, holding up her hands in a calm gesture. "Karen, please listen. This is my property. The documents are clear. I'm not trying to take anything from anyone. I just want to enjoy my home and my lake peacefully." Karen's face twisted with disbelief and rage. "No, you can't just claim it. I've lived here longer than you have. Everyone knows the lake belongs to the community." For a moment, the property owner felt a flicker of doubt. Could it really be that other neighbors might believe Karen? But she shook her head, taking a deep breath. She had proof, witnesses, and the law on her side. She couldn't let Karen's anger control her emotions. "I understand that you feel strongly," she said softly, "but this is my land legally. I have documents, surveys, and neighbors who can confirm it. I'm not trying to fight you. I just want to live here peacefully. Please respect my boundaries." Karen huffed, muttered something under her breath, and stormed back toward her own property. The confrontation ended, but the tension remained. The property owner knew this wasn't the last encounter. Karen's stubbornness ran deep, and she would not back down easily. Over the next few days, the harassment continued in more subtle ways. She noticed objects placed near her property line, likely intended to mark or intimidate. Once she found a note pinned to a tree, accusing her of being selfish and claiming the lake for herself. The words were angry, written in a way meant to provoke fear and doubt. She felt a pang of frustration, but also a sense of clarity. She was dealing with someone who refused to accept the truth, but that didn't mean she had to respond with fear. She began to spend more time documenting everything. Each encounter, each suspicious movement, and each note was logged carefully in a notebook. She even took photographs of objects or markings near the property line. It was tedious, and some days it felt exhausting, but she knew it was necessary. These records were her armor. One afternoon, she was walking along the lake when she spotted a few supportive neighbors watching from a distance. They waved, acknowledging her quietly, a small but meaningful gesture. It reminded her that not everyone in the community was siding with Karen. Some people recognized the truth and were willing to support her quietly. It gave her strength. The following week, she received a formal notice from her lawyer confirming that her rights were fully documented and protected. Karen could not legally interfere with her property or harass her without consequences. Holding that letter, she felt a mix of relief and empowerment. She wasn't powerless. She had taken steps to protect herself, and she could now face the situation with confidence. Even with the legal protection in place, she knew she couldn't ignore Karen completely. Confrontations were likely to continue, at least until Karen realized she could not intimidate her. The property owner learned to manage her emotions carefully, responding with calm, reasoned words instead of letting anger or fear dictate her actions. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching the sun set over the lake, she reflected on the challenges of the past few weeks. The shouting, the rumors, the subtle harassment, it had all been a test of patience and perseverance. She realized that standing firm didn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it meant preparation, documentation, and quiet confidence. She had learned to trust herself, to trust her rights, and to trust that she could handle whatever came next. The lake, still and shimmering in the sunset, seemed to reflect her own determination. It reminded her why she had chosen this place in the first place, the peace, the beauty, and the feeling of belonging. Karen's anger could not take that away. It was hers, just as she had dreamed, and she would continue to protect it. In the following days, she noticed Karen becoming slightly more cautious. Perhaps the formal notice from the lawyer had made her pause. Perhaps the supportive neighbors and the consistent documentation had shown her that the property owner would not be intimidated. Whatever the reason, the tension, while still present, had shifted slightly. It was no longer a constant, unpredictable threat, but a challenge that she was prepared to face. She continued to enjoy small moments of peace by the lake. She planted flowers, cleaned the porch, and kayaked in the early mornings. Each act was a quiet assertion of her rights and her determination to enjoy her property. It wasn't a dramatic victory, but it was a meaningful one. She was reclaiming her home, one small step at a time. One afternoon, she decided to take a longer walk along the property boundaries, making sure everything was in order. As she walked, she felt a sense of pride in the way she had handled the situation. She had remained calm, documented carefully, and sought legal advice. She had turned fear into preparation and determination. Each step along the path was a reminder that she belonged here, and no one could take that away. As the sun dipped behind the hills that evening, she stood by the lake, feeling the cool breeze on her face. The water reflected the pink and orange sky, calm and peaceful. For a moment, she allowed herself to truly relax, knowing that she had done everything she could to protect her home. Karen's anger was still there, lingering at the edges, but she had learned to face it without fear. She whispered to herself softly, "This is my home. I will not be intimidated. I belong here." And as the first stars appeared in the sky, shimmering on the surface of the lake, she felt a quiet, deep sense of resolve. The battle was not over, but she was ready. She would protect her property, stand firm in the face of unfairness, and continue to enjoy the life she had worked so hard to create.